I can try to sing over it. I don't know. But we'll go ahead and get started. I know we are limited with time. When Simone gets here, we'll welcome her as well. But I want to thank everybody for taking the time out today to join us online as well as in person for this great event. I also want to thank the Empowered Parents Network and the Dish Women's Network for helping us co-sponsor this event. We thank you for your partnership and your allyship. I am Whitney Bryant. I am one of the founding members of the African Americans Network, as well as the current Vice President of Membership. And I am looking forward to moderating this event for you guys. With us today, we have some amazing ladies and panelists with us. Today, we are welcoming Lesley Pace from Google. Our very own Lee Ashley from Dish Network. And lastly, Alicia Jessip from Tech Systems. Thank you, ladies, for being with us today. So what I would like to do is a little different. I'm not going to go through their bios. However, I would like for you all to provide additional information about yourself to really warm up the audience to get things started. So if you all could please provide us a brief description of your current role, an interesting fact about yourself, as well as what does Black History Month mean to you? And we can start with you, Lesley.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Lesley Pace, and I am a Googler in the Boulder office. I'm a product support manager on Google Calendar, Tasks, and Google Drive. They're pulling me a lot of ways right now. Google's getting their money out of me. But in short, in the event that any of those products has a launch, I am making sure that people like it. Do they like it? Do they hate it? What's the feedback for it? And taking that back to product management and user experience. Also, if any of those products have any issues, outages, major bugs, I'm kind of triaging and being the go-between between our users and the more technical parties that actually have resolution. Interesting fact, I am a yoga instructor as well. I've been teaching since 2014, and I have been in Yoga Journal twice. So I have a bunch of copies at my mom's house. And I've also just been recently working with Lululemon, so it's been a lot of fun. If you want to check me out, I'm the Ebony Yogini online. Awesome. And Black History Month to me. Ooh, Black History Month is the shortest month. However, Black History is every day. So I feel like in February, we get to take the opportunity to really evaluate and acknowledge the cultural contributions that the Black diaspora has had to society as a whole. And it is a short month, but it's a powerful month. We did 30 events in 29 days in the Boulder office. And once again, getting pulled, but it's worth it. So that's what Black History Month is to me.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leah Ashley. I want to just thank the African American Network here at Dish. I am VP of Digital Marketing here at Dish Network, and that includes the brands under the Dish Network umbrella. See some of my team members here out to support. Hi, guys. Fun fact that's actually probably timely for the topic today. I recently found out that there's a YouTuber with my same name. And she's got a much bigger following than I do, I have to say. Well, I don't have a YouTube channel, but she has 2.7 million followers, and that's just on her main YouTube channel. She's a gamer. She could not probably be more different than me in terms of talking about social personalities, but that's a pretty fun fact I thought was appropriate for today's topic. Black History Month for me, thinking about Black history in general, there's so many, it encompasses so much. My Dish team this week, we had every staff meeting we kind of kick it off with, well, what's the question of the day? So this week, the question of the day was, something along the lines of your favorite time in history, and if you could come and be a part of that. And I see Caleb and Kelly here. They were here for that meeting. And for me, it really was the 60s, and I think it was such a powerful time, for so many reasons, just so counterculture. I think about Black history during that time, and it's really my parents' era. They were civil servants who both went on to be judges, one in federal and state court, and it's really just about the impact during that time that I translate to in terms of what Black history means for me in terms of the civil rights movement, and it's much more broad than that, but that's probably the personal impact for me. And so now, and that's that, my parents as huge role models for me, and me being a parent now, what I want my son to get out of Black History Month is just to see all of the great examples of, just scientists and inventors, and so we read, he's only 4, but we read stories about these people. And I'm reading during Black History Month, really focusing on a book that I have that goes through specific stories each night. And so I really just, for him, want him to see that and know that that means that he can be whatever he wants to be. And that's not specific to Black History Month or Black parents. It's really, any parent would say that.
Were you getting random ads on your social media from followers people trying to tap in?
So, yeah, this woman is a gamer, and I'm not into video games. So I think if they were trying to target me, it wouldn't be very efficient.
You do not want this content. Buenas tardes, I'm Alicia. I am at Tech Systems. I'm an inclusion and diversity manager. It's great to see some familiar faces, but plenty anew. Since the last time I was here doing the Build Your Brand workshop with you all, I feel like we're doing a variation of that more on the digital side. So I'm very excited to be here with all of you today. As an inclusion and diversity practitioner, I do that through our 3 strategies of workforce, workplace, and marketplace. A fun fact about me, which maybe also ties into the angle of Black History Month and all that it encompasses, is I'm Afro-Latina. My mom was born in Chihuahua, Mexico, and my dad is African-American. So thinking about that blend and how that transpires into the whole thought of what is Blackness and representing our Afro-Latinas out there in the community. Now, a bigger thought of what Black History Month really means for me, when I think about it, it comes in 2 parts, but the theme for it is learning. I'm originally from Iowa, small town Iowa. I graduated 47 in my high school class, just to give you some numbers there. And so I didn't really get the chance to absorb a lot of content related to Black figures and inventors and icons and leaders. So I wasn't encouraged to maybe critically analyze the Maya Angelou's of the world or go back and revisit the works of Audre Lorde's. So for me, it's really taking this intentional time to just soak up as much as I can and think about some areas of education that I can really grow into and latch onto that I might not have had the opportunity to do so before. And the second piece of that is taking exactly from Audre Lorde's titled book, Your Silence Will Not Protect You. So what can I do then to carry that message out and share with others? So I think to make up for lost time, it's continuing to learn and then using whatever platform I might have in a digital age to just share that message.
Great, thank you. Thank you, ladies, for giving us those descriptions. We definitely have a great panelist group today. So let's get started and let's move on. So today's topic for discussion is how to express your identity and personal brand within the digital media era. So there was a study back in 2019 done by Hootsuite and We Are Social stating that 45% of the world population was an active social media user. At that time, that was around 3.4 billion people. That is a lot of connected users. And so when we think about the increase of users on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, we think about how that is drastically changing the way humans interact with each other. We're creating these spaces where expression and interaction could be positive, but they also can be negative. So I ask our panelists today, how can we use social media and technology to drive positive conversation and inclusivity? And Alicia, if you would like to begin, since it looks like you have the mic.
How can we use social media today to create
Positive conversations, inclusivity.
So I think first and foremost, any type of conversation is going to be productive to an extent because at least it's going to get people's minds thinking about situations. The most commented post I've ever posted was after Beyonce's launched out her Netflix documentary with Homecoming, and how somebody titled it, what white people may have missed with this performance. And I never have received, I don't even have a big Facebook group of friends, but I've never really seen such an outlash of people's opinions spiraling onto that commonplace. Well, what do you mean, white people? We enjoyed it too. We love Beyonce. No, you missed this because you're not this, or you can't see it from this angle. And regardless of whether or not it ended in a positive note per se, I was happy that there was even a platform for discussion. So I think back to my original thought around, what Black History Month means to me is similarly to how I think of how I drive my social media platform at a larger scale is, hey, I am using these tools to network, to collaborate, to engage, and to create dialogue. That's really what I'm out to do, social media for. I think, maybe in between I'm posting about my bottomless brunch mimosas or the yoga class that I'm attending, but moreover, the real reason why I'm there is to hear from you all and to learn from you all. So while I definitely think there's opportunity to be intentional around, hey, let's use this for a positive discussion, like recently posting on LinkedIn and really leveraging their hashtags to try to draw on a wider audience to ask my network, hey, how are you all celebrating Black History Month? Let's generate ideas. I think it's also important, too, to not be afraid of confrontational discussion, but do it with, what would be the right word? Civility, grace in mind.
Thank you. Leah.
Yeah, I think, there are always going to be negative comments on social media. It's kind of the nature of the platform. You have that safety. You can hide behind that wall and just kind of say things that you might not normally say to someone face to face. So, I would say don't take it personally. And if you're the type of person who is using your social platform to be bold and to make your statements about your opinions and whatever it may be, don't be afraid to do that if that's your platform. For me personally, it's actually, I think, maybe it comes from just being in the digital space for so long, but just have a kind of a skepticism of digital platforms in terms of just putting your personal information out there to a great extent. So I really use, I really look at social media in terms of what can it do for me, and I'm handing over data. What can it actually do to benefit me? And so I tend to focus more so on kind of personal brand, professional networking, LinkedIn, Facebook to a certain extent to kind of just connect and get information from certain friend groups. And what I have found is that when you post positive things, especially on Facebook, that's the type of content that the algorithm tends to favor anyway. It's going to get promoted and more visibility if that's your goal. So that can be encouraging to folks. But certainly, I just think back to, like, I was probably, like, in the hundreds in terms of the first, like, Facebook user. So I was on campus with Zuckerberg when it was being tested, and just seeing how it evolved to where it is today is really, it really just makes me look at it in terms of what is the value and the benefit that it can bring to me personally.
I feel as though even though we're extremely connected online, I think that has a tendency to limit our abilities to actually interact in effective ways, especially when it comes to some of those more complex issues that have very harsh spectrums in terms of variance and opinion. And so in terms of me using social media in these spaces, a lot of it is like, how can I break out of my sphere of knowing? Like, after a while, you have friends, your friends have opinions, and you're scrolling down your timeline like, yeah, and then someone posts something that's completely out of your realm of knowing, and you're like, that is, what? It's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. And then you have to understand that there is a whole other sphere of people who are saying to them, yeah. So I am trying to make sure that I am not being siloed into my specific opinions on things, and that I have a tendency to be like, hey, friend, let me see your timeline. Like, what's your thread looking like? Like, what opinions and articles and think pieces and films are popping up in your space? And that then lends me the opportunity to understand them better, to understand where they're coming from. And I think that's where the effective dialogue can step in and come into play. I don't know that online is the most effective place to have a lot of those conversations, though, because you can hide behind your emoticon and you don't have to interact with a human being in front of you. So I think there's that big variance there.
I want to add to what Lesley said, because I wholeheartedly agree with that. So I think from an absorption piece, then social media can be really powerful for that. To your point, then not only hiding, but it's more of a safety mechanism at that point. I follow on Twitter actually a lot more people that I don't align with politically, and I don't necessarily know that I would always be around, again, thinking about like similarity bias with individuals consistently, daily. I don't break bread a lot, like, you know what I mean? That's not the environment that I'm living and breathing in consistently, but I make a really intentional, adamant effort to, at least in one of my social media verticals, to at least stay up to date and just observe and witness a little bit of what others that are not like me from a political sense might be thinking, and I think that's really important too.
Absolutely. And so kind of building upon that, talking about how you all define your digital identity, do you feel your identity, your self-identity aligns with how others perceive you online, or are you more authentic in person compared to your digital identity created?
Well, I think it's the same, but once again, that's me critiquing my own stream. So am I the most excellent judge of that? Not certain, but if you were to ask the people around me, I think they would feel it was in alignment. At Google, we have a term, it's bring your whole self to work. And so in those instances, like there's, hello, yeah, I'm gonna bring my whole self to work. I'm going to be bumping Young Thug very loud when I pull into the parking garage. You're gonna hear it, the valet's gonna hear it, you're gonna know I'm coming, and you know that that's authentic to me. And that's what is going to be happening on the thread, and that's what's going to be happening in person. I feel like a lot of times, a lot of marginalized communities who are placed in these spaces, they have a tendency to feel like you have to put up a film or a mask. If you're a woman in a room full of men, you can't be your authentic self in some cases. Or if you are a person of color in a very white space, you can't be your most authentic self. And I really, really like to go against that as much as possible. And so in doing that, I feel like it's impossible to do it in one place and not do it in another. So I like to just be consistent across the board. Most of my coworkers follow me, and they're like, "We seen you were out this weekend, like fun." And I'm like, yeah, I'm exhausted. Do you hear me? And they're like, yeah, okay, meeting later, yeah. So I think it's best to just keep it consistent.
So I have a different point of view, which I think not to be inauthentic anywhere, but it gets back to what I was saying before, just about privacy. I tend to not put as much personal information on social as maybe others do. Like, for example, I've never posted a picture of my son on Facebook or any social platform. And that's just something, that's a personal choice. But I think I'm a true believer in bringing your whole self to work. And, authenticity in terms of just being real with your team and being real across the board, I think is important. And I'm a fan of that book, that Mike Robbins book. So, I do think that it's something that can be managed. You think about your personal brand. I believe it's something you can manage depending on kind of how you're communicating that.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you're both spot on with how you look at it. And I think with the question of digital identity, right, the definition and the response to that is truly to authenticate who you are as an individual and verify that by your digital footprint. So that's manageable and managed by you as the individual. So I was listening to a couple podcasts just trying to prep around the digital brand, and all of the content is like how to take it times 10 and how to blow it up and how to attract followers. But really the heart of it all is just creating impressions so people can engage with you. So how you decide to do that, whether it's, you know, choosing to not post a ton of personal things or saying, no, let me show you the whole sector of who I am and how that shows up, is completely fine. I think it's just answering and understanding that ultimately all it is a extension of you as an individual.
Sure. Absolutely. And I know that within today's date, there are a lot of distractions, a lot of outliers and influencers that could potentially derail maybe your authentic self. So how do you all stay true to who you are when there's so many distractions out there?
I think it's just focus. I really just tend to, I probably have a limited amount of time that I'm spending on my personal social media. And so I'm assuming this question is related to social media distractions, right?
Correct.
You know, that being said, it's easy to, you know, on a Saturday afternoon, you start scrolling through, you get sucked in, and you do get distracted. But sometimes that can be a good thing. I think looking at, I tend to look at different social platforms in terms of, you know, it's not all the same. Like you were saying, Twitter is kind of where you go for information and maybe different perspectives. And so I look at that as like social news or social information. And so I think there can be actually value in that if that's a distraction, you know, at the appropriate time, of course, but getting sucked down that rabbit hole if you're learning something new. And that would be, I think, a valuable kind of distraction. Or if it's getting sucked down that rabbit hole of, you know, just being able to see what's going on with your friends. I recently relocated from the East Coast, so, you know, Facebook is really, for me, the best way of staying in touch with those folks, and so it can be a worthwhile distraction. I have tended to just, you know, I don't have, for example, all of the apps on my phone and limiting the distraction, but then welcoming the distraction at the appropriate time.
I am very extroverted, but I am also very, you can't tell. Yeah, I'm also very introspective. The yoga part of me feels when there is an imbalance. And I think it's just very significant to understand your mental health and well-being and understand you as a person. And when it's time for you to turn in and take that time. On my phone, like I have a 30-minute limit for all socials. So, you know, the iPhone, you can cut yourself off because it is addicting. And there was a point when I was getting to the point, I deleted the apps and then I was like reaching for my phone like a drug addict. And I was just like, yo, this is not good. Like, we must stop this. So I have to limit that time just so I can continue to be in alignment with myself out in the real world. And then I think that then lends to the continued authenticity on those channels when it is time for me to return. Like January, I always do a cleanse. Like I will drink juice for 3 days, which I know is not legitimate, but I do it. I like it. And then I'll just do water and veggies, no alcohol, like none of those things. And I will delete the social media and I will turn the TV off and I will turn the Wi-Fi off in my house and I will be like, we're reading books, we're journaling, we're taking the moment. So I think in those moments where you feel those distractions happening, like turn your phone on Do Not Disturb. Unless there's like a major emergency, those people will be okay. And you can tap back in when you need to tap back in and just take care for self first.
Those distractions are real, and if you find yourself really getting succumbed to that reaching or that thought of, oh, I'm in my lip, let me just laissez-faire and scroll through my Instagram, you do get those serotonin boosts. I mean, Simon Sinek talks about it in his book, Leaders Eat Last, like that age that we're in can condition us to yearn for that and start to crave for that and seek our validation for that. So when I start to think about how it might be distracting me and maybe consuming me is the word then I would reach for, I definitely take it back to, okay, if social media is an extension of myself, then what about myself is feeling off balance right now where I'm yearning for those distractions?
Absolutely. And so then kind of taking a step back, I'm curious to see, how do you all define your digital identity today?
would define it as very transparent and very open. I like to be able, it was last May, and all the kids were graduating, and you can see it, and like you see all of this, but there is some child somewhere who is like, I'm not walking with my class, or I didn't pass the bar this time. There is always that success, but no one is calling out that downfall. And so in that moment, I was just like, y'all, let me tell you my graduation story. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how I lost my scholarship my senior year. Let's talk about how I almost didn't walk and I got my cap and gown 2 days before and I had no stole and no cords and no medals, but I walked out of there with my degree. Let's also talk about how I had no job after college and how I moved back home with my parents and I was a server at the club, like the golf club up the street from here, where I used to do my basketball banquets. Let's talk about that. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing, because like everyone is celebrating right now and I'm heartbroken in my room. And so I think with the definition of my digital identity, it's always to be as transparent and open as possible. Not to say that I'm an oversharer, but I would rather you see all of the ugly as well as the good.
I love that, and I actually remember that post vividly because I was one of those people that was like, yes, queen, this is the content that I'm here for because it's absolutely real. So I love following Lesley. I'm like, oh, she's doing her yoga. I better get up and go to corp hour. With my digital identity, again, I think the real word that I think of it as is just, again, that brand, that extension of my brand. And I try very hard. That does not have to be complicated. I just want to embrace all things that are me and share what's relevant and organize it in a way that's relevant for you all as followers, as likers, as friends, as connected, can engage with it. So I try to keep just that simple thought process, but on the other side of it too, and I think that's why I love having you here too, when you're like, well, actually I see it from a different viewpoint. I think our millennial generation has a different approach to how we're leveraging social media, and I really like that. And it does vary from my director, and then it varies from our executive director. She was talking with me, and she's like, you know, I love that you post. She follows me on Instagram. I'm like, all right, here we go. I'm not holding back. I want you. This is me. And she's like, sometimes I just wonder, you know, like in between your posts around Dish Network, you know, you are coming back from Vegas, and I'm like, well, that's what I did, and I want people to know that it's okay, because you can, as we joke around, be both-handed. Like, you absolutely can be, and I think that's super, super important, because that's how we're evolving, especially if we're going to get serious about moving away from work-life balance that our employee experience teams are driving, that our HR teams are driving, that our diversity inclusion teams are driving, and move into work-life integration. Well, maybe it integrates for me also showing up Monday with a little bit of a raspy voice, but I'm here, I've got my extra shot, and I'm here to do the dang thing.
Yeah, I think for me, personal brand online is just, it's, for me, I focus on what's the kind of professional, on LinkedIn, what's the professional brand that I'm putting out there, and managing that to my benefit. Not to say, like, I definitely reconcile that with being authentic in the workplace and bringing my whole self to work by just talking about what I did over the weekend. You know, I don't necessarily have photos. I don't have photos online of my weekend activities, but I'll talk about or joke about, you know, tantrums that my son, husband, yeah, maybe, my son is having, or whatever the case may be. Just bring that, you know, and bring that and talk about it. Not to necessarily have it online, but you know, I think the part of the reason is just you know, the amount of time that goes into managing a personal brand and other platforms, like if you're going to be across Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, I mean, that's a full-time job, you know, so it's part of it is practical too. It's just maybe easier for me to just do it in real life.
So I think another thought too in this conversation, I was curious to see which angle the panel discussion was going to go. I think this is much more philosophical, right, around your presence and your digital media footprint. I haven't heard a ton of strategy around like, okay, if this is your end goal, here are the building blocks to get there, and that's fine. So for me, when I think about this conversation then and how it really manifests itself into my world as an individual, it is two thoughts. The first then for me is I do want to take the time to put it all out there, and I think they're not all out there. I'm also not wording myself well there either. It's not like it's all there, but what that day I remember Lesley putting that content about like, hey, let's talk about the other side of upon graduating to and what that feels like. Why I appreciated that so much as a fellow young professional, woman of color, whatever, is that we're keeping it real in the sense of we don't all have it figured out. And I think it's so easy to get caught up in this social media conversation around not just distractions, but really comparing and really being like, do they seem to have it all together? Do I not have it all together? They seem to have that. I don't have that. Oh gosh, now they've got this. And really start putting yourself in this less than category. And then there's others that stay flexing and are always on this above you category. And I'm like, oh, you know, are there jet setting, spending, shopping. I'm like, wow, do you have that 9 to 5? Like, what? How are you doing that? So I like, as an individual, being really intentional of like, yeah, I want you to see a little bit of the mimosa to the yoga to my book club to me coming to speak at various events, because that is my authentic self, and I want to share with you this journey of how I grow into this professional and that it really, really is integrated. I think the second thought is then you have to make sure how you're managing it and being mindful of then who is engaging with you. The day I checked Instagram and saw like 10 followers that were all Vegas promoters was a sign that, okay, I should probably figure this out, because that's not the brand that I want to always be, so I don't want all of this. And just keeping that pace to identify the equilibrium if I'm going to fill all these buckets and make sure there's some neutrality amongst them.
Absolutely. And I know, Alicia, you spoke a little bit about different generations using social media differently, as well as alluding to kind of followers. And so I know a lot of people are searching for social media role models nowadays. It's kind of different where we're looking at who we're looking up to. I know for myself, I like to follow Gabrielle Union. I love her, by the way. Shout out to Gabrielle and D. Wade. But also I like Michelle Obama. But I mean, there's a spectrum of who you follow. Is there any advice on, one, you know, how you all choose to follow for social media role models, and who might be your top social media role model that you like to follow every day?
I feel like most of those, I don't particularly follow celebrities. All of the people that I follow are people that I've had a conversation with in person, and like, I know you. That's just comfortable for me. I love Michelle. I don't want to see what you're doing, Michelle, but I love you. Like, I love you, but I'll meet you one day. That's my hope in my mind. So I'm just like, you know, I'll get to know you. And like, one of my primary, like with the yoga things, my yogi big sister, she's the global Lululemon ambassador. She is a doctor of yoga therapy within schools. And so I followed her and I was like, hey, I want to come volunteer at your yoga camp in Atlanta for high school girls, yoga literature art camp. And she was like, you want to fly from Colorado? It's not paid. And I was like, it's okay. I just quit my job. I have all the time in the world. And so my role model became my mentor. And so now, 5 years later, we are still very close and we are still friends. And so I like accessible relationships like that. And that is something that's applicable to my life. I would have never been in Yoga Journal without having met Chelsea. I would have never been with Lulu having never met Chelsea. So those are relationships that I like to continue to develop and build, but not like star stock people. I don't know.
So for me, I'm a huge fan of all the people you mentioned, Michelle and Gabrielle Union, but I'm in thinking about a social media role model, just kind of bring it back to, okay, for me, what does that mean? Personal brand online. And what, if you pick that apart, what are the pieces of that? Like the content, the strategy, and then how engaging is it overall? And the person for me who's really mastered those building blocks, and my lens is probably a little bit more focused on LinkedIn, is the editor-in-chief of Wired, Nick Thompson, who just, I think, and he's a content expert, so it's maybe a little easier for him than it is for us everyday folk. But he has really mastered the translating his personal brand, which is being an expert on all things digital and all things technology, into building blocks in terms of what he puts out on LinkedIn and presumably on his other social channels. So, he has for each day of the week a specific theme. Within that theme, he's got really engaging, interesting content where a lot of ways it's driving people back to engage with Wired.com or other Condé Nast properties. For example, he's got, like, every week, what's the most interesting thing in tech? And it's really just an open question intended to engage his audience. But he really executes, I think, those building blocks of building a personal brand in a really effective way.
I don't know per se that I have one specific individual that I think encompasses and embodies all that I aspire to be as a social media role model. I just think I am strategic about who I follow to encourage what I want and what I need. So maybe it is a series of workout gurus or yoga enthusiasts that might motivate me, or put mantras or words of affirmations up that I can scroll and see on my timeline. It might be from a professional setting, the Dr. Nita Mosby Tylers, who are local of the world, all the way up to the Werner Myers, who are leading Netflix's inclusion diversity strategy, that I know when I get on LinkedIn, I'll see what they're posting and can, engage in that. So I think it just varies, but I really wish Simone was here, because I would consider her a local leader of how they're really putting their brand out there in an honest way of, like, hey, this is me hanging out with my gal pals at happy hour at Bar Helix, which happens to be a Black-owned bar, so come support, all the way into here's an event that I'm leading at the Riveter. We're talking about XYZ. Here's when our next one is, because it's engaging, and I know that if I watch her stories and follow along, there'll be content that might resonate and be relevant for me to join in or attend or click on to follow.
Great. Awesome. So we're going to pivot a little bit to talking about opportunity for all. So in your opinion, how has technology developed new ways of inclusion and exclusion for individuals of different social backgrounds?
So from a tech standpoint, if I think about corporate entities, if we're going to talk about how it might have excluded first and then maybe leading with the positive on more of a personal note, it's still there, right? You look at the numbers across corporate America from a technology standpoint, it's clear that we're not really leveraging social media and all of its capabilities to attract, to look at, hey, come join what we're doing over here, just by way of the numbers. So I think there's still a lot of work to do, and I think that is a key critical component when we start to look at our strategies as hiring practices for organizations to leverage technology, to leverage social media, where we know is housing and hosting the upcoming workforces, to tap into and meet them where they're at, to engage with them, to join us. So I think that's first and foremost. And if you are leading, or if we are leading HR, I&D, employee experience, and we're not partnering with marketing and digital transformation leaders in strategic ways, that's a for sure area of opportunity to start to do that. I think from a more personal standpoint of how I've seen social media and the digital era actually really promote in a positive light was along my hair care journey. I'm from small town Iowa. My mom is Mexican, so she was for sure startled at how she was going to control curly hair. Hers is like bone straight. And there were no YouTube videos of how to co-wash your hair and head out the door. There were no Instagram quick IGTV of how to do type of braids or lock methods or what have you. So I really focus on the positive end of how social media has helped me personally. And now I think about my role and what I do today, and it's, okay, how do I elevate that and put that in a strategy that can really, really drive ROI for greater communities?
Mm-hmm. I would say working at Google has been a very eye-opening experience in terms of inclusivity in tech. We have a whole head of product inclusion now, which was a title that possibly 10 years ago didn't exist. And that's simply because we were starting to understand that with the design of these products, bias was being implemented, consciously or unconsciously. And then beyond that, we were not even considering the user journey of a lot of other users. So most specifically, I've just took a sign language class at work. And so understanding how can we go about ensuring that our deaf users are able to use these products accordingly, our blind users are able to use these products accordingly. There were even some instances where, say for instance, I was swiping over my phone to switch a song from left to right. If my hand was too dark, and mind you, I'm not the darkest of persons, it wasn't working for me. So why is that happening? Because only white engineers tested on it to begin with, and they never considered that a darker hand could not be visible to the product. Yikes, right? So then it's mass distributed, and everyone's like, it's not working. I don't understand. Yes, because it wasn't built with you in mind. And so I think that it's a very significant journey with what's happening with user experience research. I'm about to start my master's in human-computer interaction in the fall, just to be able to work to combat these oversights in testing and in a lot of these processes. So I think that is what I've seen in terms of exclusion. And in terms of inclusion, what I've seen is just the continuous brilliance and innovation of a lot of people who are participants in these marginalized communities, because a lot of times you are limited in a space and you have to find an alternative way to make your voice heard. And so we've now had the opportunity to say, well, you know, if I can't get on that news outlet, I have very well can create my own platform. I can create my own blog. I can be an excellent tweeter, if you will, and make a very interesting thread of things. So I think that is where the inclusion comes in. It's not like we're going to include you now. It's like, you have to include me now because I've broken through and I've made my own platform that you're now interested in. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting that as many doors and content proliferation that social media has opened up, with there being a special interest, you know, YouTuber or blog for pretty much everyone, there is still bias, right, on social media. And so, you know, as part of, like, for example, the congressional inquiry into Facebook, it really wasn't about bias primarily, but that was a big point that came up. And it was something that Maxine Waters really pushed Mark Zuckerberg on, as what are you going to do about it? So I'm optimistic that it'll be, the awareness is there, that it's an issue, and hopefully, you know, Facebook and others can be held accountable to addressing it, and hopefully, it sounds like Google's addressing it. But I do think it's possibly a benefit of it being on such large platforms, although we never want to see bias happen anywhere. It is in the spotlight, and it seems like it's being addressed.
Absolutely.
Quick plug for Women in Tech. We're doing a bias screening film on March 5th at Prologis downtown. It's free, cost a pretty coin to get here, so our communities came together. I definitely encourage all of you, if you are available, to join that, because that is the bigger discussion in the tech sector around the bias piece. But again, I think if we're looking at it from, okay, well, what's my call to action as an individual in a greater organization where I can probably contribute to this, it's looking at your areas, and one of them, and we have identified this, is through the workforce and hiring practices. So maybe the next time you're in that great product development meeting, and as a group of white engineers, and you're, you know, thinking about how we're going to get this out to market as fast as we can because we want to get competitive, we want to get the biggest market share available, we'll pause, first step in, you know, handling your bias, recognize who's in the room and say, okay, maybe we're not representative of the market we're about to sell to. What can we do from a hiring standpoint to focus on that? And I think the digital angle can really, really contribute to that. And the other thing that I thought of too with digital and social media that it can also do for these marginalized, underrepresented groups is also provide a space for affinity. And that was something we were really adamant about this year with launching 2 virtual networks for our Black women at Tech Systems, as well as our Hispanic Latino employees. We recognize that I'm the only one in Colorado. There's really only one in Arkansas. Is it feasible for us to get up every day and go out to lunch? No, but what can we do virtually, and what can we do digitally to break that bread and create that platform for each other?
Wonderful. So I do want to be mindful of time. I know we only have about 5 minutes left, but I did want to open it up to any additional questions from the audience or online for our panelists.
I have a question. So I had went to this workshop that discussed, you know, show that real side of them. And they only let a select amount of people go and see the real raw side of them. And then the Instagram side where, I mean, I don't think they're jet setting, but, you know, where they're just, you know, showing the best sides of themselves. What do you think we can do in order to educate our youth to let them know, like, it's okay to show up 100% and be yourself, and you don't need to have two different pages to embody who you are?
Some of them need two different pages.
So my previous job, I was an athletic director at a school. And so as such, I was dropped back into an educational environment at like 27. And I was like, oh my God, what's wrong with y'all? Oh my God. So that was where I really started to understand that we talk about media literacy a ton. So they know what it is to be appropriate online and not. And I think in some cases, that is, the Finsta is the best way for them to go about doing that. Because sometimes it's a little too far. Alicia said, all out there. So we don't need to be all out there. That's not being inauthentic. It's just like, you know, this is not your diary. Exactly. This is not a confidant or a friend to lend an ear to. Like, this is not what that is. And so I think that is a very innovative method for them to still be able to express themselves, but to also not jeopardize the life that they have ahead of them. I'm literally doing research right now on Gen Z and the way that they want to use support. So they don't want to be on a chat room. They don't want to talk to you on the phone. Their attention span is actually 2 seconds less than that of millennials. So it's a matter of catering to that need, and they have found a workaround, and I support the workaround, because sometimes when you go and look, like my little cousins, I'm like, oh. I would never want to see this like on your real page, and like you would have all the aunties calling me like, what is your cousin doing? You need to get them, and I don't want to have that. So have your Finsta, do it.
I think part of it is confidence, right? It's in addition to you know, kind of that filter that maybe people need to have in some way in what they put out there. Being able to just, you know, if there's somebody that you had in mind that you are thinking like, why do they have these two different accounts? If to the extent that there's a confidence issue there, that they're concerned that if they put everything on one account, that certain posts aren't going to get enough likes or whatever the case may be. I think there's definitely a deeper issue going on that some of the platforms are recognizing and starting to address with different types of tests. But you know, I think it's then it comes down to like that addiction to the platform and having that be all encompassing and all controlling and controlling your emotions and just the level of usage. I think. Eventually, I think there will be probably more ways to moderate the usage as a way to kind of just address the root cause of what's going on there.
The quick thought that I have with this too around maybe the confidence piece or the concern is to, again, more philosophical, but what it might be attributing to. And I think one of them, and I don't know if it's all, but that I've read about, especially for this generation, but I definitely see it play up with mine too, is this whole idea of cancel culture. We're so quick to cancel individuals as soon as they do something that we don't necessarily agree with and put them off, that there is a state of concern or double checking or maybe having to hide or have hidden profiles to present ourselves in a certain way. And it's really, really affecting our Gen Z population by way of what we see through online bullying, by way of what we see through suicide rates that are really, really unfortunate. So I think that is something that we, maybe as the older generations, have to be mindful of. And I catch myself all the time. I don't know if you all saw that Charlotte gal. She's a blonde singer from London that just went viral because there was a guy in the subway with the microphone trying to get people to sing along, and she nailed it. She sang a song by Lady Gaga. I don't even know what the song was, but it was so beautiful, so riveting. She literally spiked up almost to 1 million followers within 48 hours. And I was on Twitter, and the community of Black Twitter was discussing her of like, okay, do we stand for her? Do we not? What do we think? Like, let's go run reports on her and like look through all of her social media. And they found one photo from Facebook like 10 plus years ago, hers out at Halloween with a native headdress on. And people are like, nope, 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 I can't. She's canceled, da-da-da. We're so quick to dismiss people. So I think that might be an element that we have to check ourselves with corrective action around, hey, we got to, instead of a one up, one down, that's the inner critic, by the way. I'm taking that from Kimberly Scott. The one up, one down, and just recognize our compassionate center. And at the end of the day, it is a human engaging with us on the other side of that laptop, tablet, computer, cell phone. Let's show and lead with the grace first.
Great question.